Hi, good morning. It's Monday. This is Jennifer from the Berrien History blog. I'm here at Rose Hill Cemetery, and I'm gonna do a short little video of a murder victim that's buried here. And I'm gonna walk you to the grave right now. So let me flip it. And we're gonna pass through a few graves here as we go. This is the Kephart family plot. That's Phil Kephart. He was our first druggist in town, and he also is in the story that I'm gonna tell you. Here, right behind him, is the Kimmels, founders of the town. They founded the homestead that is at the end of Shaker Farm Lane. Let's see, let's just take a little walk. We're coming up on, this is Worthy Putnam. There's a story about him. I have not wrote about it, but it's pretty interesting. It's on Instagram right now. That's where I found it. So stay tuned for his story. This is the Soldiers Monument, the War Memorial. This was put up, I think, 1887. Civil War vets. See the line of Civil War vets, and there's several Civil War vets in the cemetery, and there's some that even died in the Civil War. I wrote about this one over here, this family, the Bartholomews. If anybody wants these stories, I can link them in the comments. They're on the website, but anyway, the Bartholomew stone is pretty interesting looking there. Almost makes me think there was something on top here, but I don't know what it was. One of the brothers died in the Civil War. The other one, who's actually buried here, did not die in the Civil War. But I am off to this tree over here. You can see it. It's coming up. And this is a story that took place in 1902. And once I get over here, I'll show you the actual grave. It's a nice shaded spot because of this pine tree. But this is the grave that we're talking about. You can't read it, and it's fairly small compared to, you know, if you look like just a standard size grave there. George Michael makes you want to dance. And then we have that grave there. Now let me get this set up here. All right. So this story is about a guy by the name of Bill Mikesell, Mikesell, Bill Mikesell. And Bill was born in 1849 in South Bend, Indiana. And his parents' names were Deborah and can't remember his father's name right now. But anyway, he married in 1869 in South Bend to a woman by the name of Clara Grissinger, I think, or Grissinger. And they had 4 kids, all sons. And unfortunately, she died in 1886. And I'll tell you how she died in just a little bit. But anyway, once she died, he moved elsewhere. And he ended up, by 1892, he was living in Benton Harbor, Michigan. He was working at a laundry place in Benton Harbor. And at some point in the next few years, he met a woman by the name of Cynthia Pastors. Now, she and him, and she had 2 kids from a previous marriage as well, they came to Berrien Springs, and everybody assumed that they were a family, that they were married, and that the kids were Bill's kids, but they weren't, and they weren't married. But anyway, we'll get to that later. They lived on top of Hammond's Harness Shop, which is, if you imagine Harding's parking lot right now, the new one where the sign is that advertises all their great sales there. It's right on the corner of North Mechanic and Ferry Street. So that was where the harness shop was. And I'll insert a picture here of the 1899 Sanborn map that shows where the harness shop was. And they had a little living quarters up above there. And actually Cynthia kind of acted as a landlady a little bit. She rented out rooms to boarders to help, make a little extra money. But it was a relatively small place. Now, shortly after they moved in there, John, the youngest son, moved in too. Now, John isn't in this cemetery. If you look right here, there's another grave. That's one of John's brothers. I believe that's Harvey. So anyway, John had come to live with them. And Bill Mikesell always had a bad relationship with his sons. And he had a bad relationship with everybody, really. Nobody really liked him. He was just a jerk. So this bad relationship he had with his sons was even worse with his youngest son, John, who came to live with him, because he found out that John and Cynthia were having an affair. So that just, he blew his top. He beat up Cynthia. Bill did. And Bill, he actually kind of ran out of town. Cynthia put a warrant out for his arrest, and he left. And John stuck around. He kind of became the man of the house. He even became a plumber, just like Bill was. So anyway, I think Bill went back to South Bend. At least that's what it kind of sounds like, because a little while later, one of the other sons who was in South Bend sent word up to Cynthia and John that Bill was talking about coming back, and he was still pretty mad, and he was saying that he was going to blow up the house. He was going to blow it up with dynamite. So the family was kind of on edge. Cynthia moved out for a short period of time, and just for the safety of herself and her kids, who were 11 and 9 years old. So things kind of settled down a bit, though, and she moved back home, and that's when Bill came back. So it was June the 15th, 1902, when he came back. And he was drunk. It was nighttime. And he came, banging at the door, and it was locked, and Cynthia would not open it for him. So he did what you can imagine a drunk man who was very upset would do. He busted down the door, and much to his surprise, John was inside greeting him with a gun, and he put 4 bullets into his father. And 3 of them hit like his shoulders and his arms. 1 made it to his left lung. It was a .32 caliber bullet. So the neighbors heard the ruckus. They rushed over. They pulled Bill down the stairs into a nearby building, and some doctors were called, and they examined him. It was 1902, remember. They said they had to use a match to examine him, and they took his clothes off, and tried to make him comfortable. They didn't know how long he was going to live. Now, he didn't die. He actually hung on for a little while, and they were able to remove 3 of the bullets, but not the one that lodged in his left lung. So he he died 2 days later, but that gave everybody a chance to kind of talk to him, which was kind of a good thing. And I guess he called his son John a coward, And he also had told people that John shouldn't be blamed for what happened. Okay, so they also said he didn't think he was going to die. He was kind of stubborn, right? He really didn't think he was that bad off condition, but he was not really aware of how bad that one bullet lodged into his lung. So everybody else kind of knew that he wasn't going to live long. They even brought in a reverend who talked to him, and he did die at like 2 days later, and he was put here in Rose Hill Cemetery. He was cremated, according to cemetery records here. He was cremated, and he was put in front of this pine tree. His son there, Harvey's grave, he wasn't there yet. I'm not sure about George Michael didn't die till 1910, so he wasn't there yet. Not sure about these two graves here, but so this is a pretty secluded part of the cemetery. There weren't a whole lot of stones around by 1902. And John was arrested, and they held a coroner's inquest, and pretty much everybody kind of defended John. They thought that, he was acting in self-defense. Some of the newspapers at the time, too, are just fascinating to read because there was no love lost for old Bill Mikesell. The Berrien Springs Era, this was their headline. I'll read it to you. It says, "William Mikesell killed by his son. End of a miserable life." And then a Niles paper said that the people of this village of Berrien Springs believed that John had done the most commendable act of his life by shooting his father. I mean, the public sentiment was just really, really against Bill. They were on John's side. So the townsfolk collected money, kind of a early GoFundMe petition, if you want to think of it like that. They collected money to hire John a good lawyer. It was O'Hara. And James O'Hara was a pretty good lawyer. But he ended up dropping the case because he thought John acted too hastily, and he even said that the more he learned about the case, the more he believed John had actually murdered his father. So he dropped the case. Katie and Andrews, like a dual firm of lawyers, picked up the case and defended John in the inquest. And the inquest basically said what everybody was thinking. John acted in self-defense. All the witnesses said, Bill had it coming. He had it coming. He had it coming. Right? He only had himself to blame. You should have been there. You should have seen it. You know that you would have done the same. Chicago. I love that musical. Anyway, but even though he was let off in the coroner's inquest, he was still officially charged with murder. Now, his $5,000 bail was reduced to $1,000, which he was able to post with the help of 3 of his buddies. And those 3 buddies who kind of financed his bail were William Dester, who is just over here, I think, in the cemetery. I came across his grave the other day when I was here. Another guy named Horace Knott, who was a co-worker of his, another plumber, well driver, who actually lived in my house at one time, which is kind of neat. And Joseph Wyckoff, who was an auctioneer, and I think he may have been a saloon owner at some point in Berrien Springs history too. But those 3 guys paid John's bail. And in February of 2003, the real trial started, right? Attorney Ira Ryford, was the prosecuting attorney. The judge was Judge Coolidge out of Niles. And you had Katie and Andrews defending John. And they testified that even the prosecutor's witnesses, which were called first, pretty much all testified to the bad character of Bill Mikesell. It came out that he'd threatened his sons many times. He threatened Cynthia many times. One time he chased them out of the house with a butcher knife. It was brought up that Cynthia at first said that she thought he had a knife that night, but it turned out he didn't. He was actually unarmed when he was shot. And they asked her, why did you think he had a knife? And she said, well, because he always carried a knife. Because he was always threatening, whenever he got mad at someone, he was threatening to cut the small part of their heart out. I mean, that was apparently his thing, right? He would always say that. I'm going to cut the small part of your heart out. So I guess you got to carry a knife if you're going to make threats like that. But he didn't have a knife on him the night he was killed. So they actually presented his flannel at the trial too, his bloody flannel, which kind of was kind of morbid if you think of it. I wonder if that flannel's still in the courthouse records somewhere in some drawer. They say it was it had 4 holes in it, and one hole was the size of a small apple. You can imagine. It's like, wow. Dr. William Robinson, who was one of them who examined Bill, he's the one who, well, he was one of many witnesses that heard Bill call John a coward and said he shouldn't be blamed for what had happened. So did a Dr. Green testify to that same thing, and so did even Phil Kephart. You remember Phil Kephart, the druggist here? I walked past his grave when I came in. He testified that as well. Casey Martin testified that, and so did a Reverend Burkett. So the guy who read him his, last rites or whatever and made sure he was good with the Lord and all that, he testified too that Bill said, don't blame my son. Maybe he even believed that he had it coming. I don't know. Probably not. He was a jerk. But anyway, so the trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. And they came up with the decision that, to the surprise of no one, John Mikesell was not guilty because he acted in self-defense. So the town kind of breathed a sigh of relief. John was let go. Even Prosecutor Ryford was kind of satisfied. He said he presented the best case that he could present because it was his job to do so, and he didn't really think that John was guilty either. As an epilogue to this story, John and Cynthia, I don't know how long they stayed together, because by 1907, which was 5 years later after the killing, he married a lady by the name of Laverne Cleveland of South Bend. Now, her father lived in Dowagiac, and when they married, she was only 16 and John was 31 years old. So it was already kind of that's a big age gap even back then, because she's just a kid. So they were having trouble pretty early on, and by 1909, she was back living with her father. Apparently they'd split up, but John actually followed her to her father's house and was kind of stalking her a bit, and he saw her get into a buggy of a local milkman who he said that she was, having an affair with. His name was Henry Blish. So, what do you think John did? What do you think John did? John shot at him. Yeah, he had brought his gun, and he, I guess, impulsively shot at him. Or maybe it was planned. I don't know. But he actually hit the guy in the buggy. It grazed his shoulder. Didn't hurt him very bad, but he, he went to jail again, and he went up on charges for attempted murder, and which were later dropped to just typical assault and battery, and he pled guilty to that, and he was given 18 days in jail. Okay, part of the reason he was only given 18 days in jail was because he'd already served 42 days in jail, and he got credit for time served, so his his sentence was actually 60 days in jail, which is still pretty lenient. But anyway, so I don't know what John was doing, but he had a lot of people defending him all the time and taking it real easy on him. So in 1911, he was still married to Laverne, and this is another crazy one. He caught her cheating again, according to him, allegedly cheating. This time, he caught her cheating with his own brother, Frank Dudley Mikesell. And he brought charges against him because back then, in 1911, we had adultery was on the books and it was enforced. This is back in the good old days when you couldn't do this stuff. You couldn't do stuff like this. So, right. And narrator's voice, it happened all the time. But anyway, he actually got him arrested. He got his own brother arrested and his own wife arrested for having an affair. They sat in jail for like 3 weeks waiting for trial because they both pled not guilty. And then at the end of 3 weeks, when the trial was coming up, he told the prosecutor, he's like, "Yeah, I changed my mind. I'm not gonna testify against them." So guess what? The charges were kind of just dropped and they were let out, and that's that. So it did come out though in that adultery story. I'm sorry, no, it came out in the 1909 buggy assault and battery story that Laverne could never get a divorce from John. And she told the judge that there was something that prevented her from getting a divorce from John. And it was never revealed what. I'm wondering if it's just because she had been unfaithful a few times with him, and maybe, that would count against her getting a divorce. Maybe he would have to file for divorce. I'm not really sure how it worked back in the early 1900s, but anyway, we didn't have no-fault divorce back then, right? So, another story that came out real quick, because I'm getting past my time here, is that when they were married at one time, they were arguing over $2 in the downtown of Berrien Springs, and John wanted, I guess, Laverne had this $2 and John wanted it, so she stuck it in her mouth so he couldn't get it, and he started choking her to try to get the money, and he ended up pushing her backward, like over against the front window of Wilson's Hardware, and it actually broke the window pane of the glass there. Now, that was brought up in reference to the 1911 story where Verna was having an affair with John's brother, but the Berrien Springs papers referred to that incident happening with not with John, not with Frank, but with Harvey, and Harvey is the other brother right there. So who knows if that was Harvey or if it was John, but it did come up. Now, after that, John actually did remarry in 1924. I don't know if they ever did get a divorce because it didn't say. He married a woman by the name of Sarah. Laverne remarried too, and she died in 1976. And when she died, she was listed as a widow on her death certificate. So that could have been her current husband, or it could have been reference to John. John ended up dying in 1941. And it's kind of sad that he ended up killing himself. He inhaled gas, and the paper said he'd been ill for some period of time. And he was 65 years old, and he is buried in Mishawaka City Cemetery. So, anyway, he didn't want to be married next to his old man here. He didn't want to be buried, well, he was probably living in Mishawaka by that time anyway. So I'm going to take a short walk here because when I was investigating this story and trying to find these graves, Armando here, the sexton, helped me find that grave in front of that pine tree. He was a lot of help because I didn't really know where I was going. And he told me it was funny that I should be doing a story like that because he's recently had paranormal investigator has come out here and focusing on this grave here, and this is Lucy J. Thompson, and this was the daughter of N.W. and L. Thompson. You can see it. There's no other graves around here. Her parents aren't around here. She was only 10 years old when she died. But anyway, the paranormal investigator apparently gets a lot of activity right here, and she says that the activity kind of stops when there's a man around. Okay, so we're kind of speculating, like, well, what happened to Lucy? Did something happen to her? Is the paranormal activity that the investigator is getting, is it kind of coming from really over there? A murder victim? Or is it coming from little 10-year-old Lucy here? Lucy was one of many children of N.W. Thompson. His name was Noble Ware Thompson, and he was actually an attorney, and he was supervisor of Royalton Township. A big family, lots of kids. All the kids had a middle initial of A instead of Lucy here, who had a middle initial of J. I don't know if that's significant, but anyway, Lucy died in 1855, and in 1860, her dad was actually accused of raping a little girl by the name of Hayes, Ellen Hayes, I believe her name was, and he bugged off out of town, went to Missouri where they arrested him. And the person who tipped off the police was actually Mrs. Thompson, Lucy's mother, also named Lucy. And he was arrested, went to trial, but he was exonerated. He was let off, and they said the little girl would make up stuff. She made up stuff about other people, and she'd made up stuff about Noble that was not true, other than, you know, the fact that he was doing bad things to her. But anyway, so take that with a grain of salt. Don't know if that has anything to do with Lucy. But for spooky season here in October in Rosehill Cemetery, there is a little mystery surrounding Lucy Thompson, who is buried just behind kitty corner to this pine tree where Bill Mikesell, brute that he was murdered in 1902. She died in 1855. So maybe this is where they put the people with, like, families. Just stuck them out here, way in the back of the cemetery, because this is a lake, Lake Chapin, right there. We can walk over there and actually see. But anyway, that's all I got for you today. I'm going to be doing another True Crime Tuesday story tomorrow. It also involves a Berrien Springs case. Yeah, see, right down the hill is the lake. That's pretty steep down there. But I hope you enjoyed. I hope you have a good week here. And until next time, bye-bye.